Hi, Meg.
Hi, Aunt Claire. What's up?
I'm doing well. What's up on your end?
Nothing much. I have a new plant here. My mom has, it's my plant. And then when I moved to Denver, she adopted it. And now that I'm back from Denver, like 4 years later, she clearly is tired of it. And I just woke up a few days ago and it's in my set. She just moved.
Well, I'm in the most boring part of my apartment, so I don't have anything. I guess you can see the corner of a yellow pillow, but
That looks like a beautiful, like mustard yellow.
it's a mustard, pretty mustard. If I move it, I'm going to make a mess because, as you know, there's a reason you only see this.
You don't have a perfectly clean room?
My room is a particularly messy room currently. So, no.
Forgive you.
Thank you. But we've got things to talk about because we teased in the video that will be published a week before this one about a follow-up, or rather a second topic, actually second and third, probably more than that, 2 extra topics that we wanted to talk about that are related to the pieces of the puzzle / why on earth did I develop an eating disorder, creating understanding of our risk factors discussion. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so the original question was, am I responsible for my eating disorder? Is this my fault? And we said no, so go watch part 1 if you haven't. So we explained more about that in depth. Today, we wanted to talk more about additional risk factors, specifically one that we had filmed a video. We had filmed about this topic in the past. There was technical issues, and we realized this needed its own conversation altogether. And for us, that risk factor is basically going through puberty as a woman, period.
Yeah. So actually, the risk factor as listed, I think, is early menstruation. But to be fair, when we were talking about it, we realized that whatever we were experiencing, it could very much transform into something that was contributing to body dissatisfaction, low self-esteem, all of that picture. So this is why we have renamed the risk factor.
Yeah, puberty in general. So if you've made it past the age of like 13, you're probably hit puberty and know what it's like. And I would say there's something really earth-shattering about going through puberty as a woman. I can't speak to the male experience, so I'm just going to say, like, for women, or I would say it's this drastic, quick change that is loaded with shame. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. It doesn't feel like anyone sits you down and says you should be ashamed, but we do get messages about our bodies that probably create a little bit of that shame too.
Oh, we really see loads of messages. Are you kidding? It's just like, it's just one of those techniques, I feel like, of controlling how, me. Okay. So if anyone doesn't know me personally, I absolutely am a feminist. So let's put that out there. I believe it is a way to sort of make sure that we don't tune into our power as much as we could. Because if we have to be ashamed about the way that our bodies function, the way that we function, then we are wasting energy, time, and resources on managing that instead of being like, tuning into that to drive more and to just go out in the world fully as ourselves without the weight of extra crap that someone is putting on our shoulders. That's the light version of my views.
And I think what's striking to me is, like, again, if you're lucky enough to age into puberty, it's everybody's body changes. It's technically a neutral experience. Like, it's a neutral experience to go through puberty, but we assign
it's like aging. I'm sorry, but if you go through puberty, it's a privilege. if you age, it's a privilege. It means you're still freaking alive. Like, you don't have a choice here. It's going to happen. If you're alive, it's going to happen. It's a normal process. It's literally you being alive in a human body.
Exactly. So it's like a neutral experience. Once we're adults and we get out of it, we're like, ooh, cringe, puberty sucked. But like, there's something about puberty that makes everything not feel neutral at all. And I think about a woman getting their period. Like, why is it that when little like teens or young girls get their periods, it's loaded with like shame, fear, and secrecy, where, you know, once you become a woman and an adult, it's more celebrated. It's openly talked about. It's interesting how the reaction.
Well, yes. And it sort of depends on which parts, right? Because even as a woman, like I remember when I was in the corporate world, if I was going to the bathroom and I had to take my pads or my tampons or something to the toilet, I was not going to just hold them in my hand and walk there. I was going to like have to like hide them. And if I was wearing something tight, then you have to be creative about like not showing or like holding it in a certain way.
Had a little packet like
yeah, and then when you need one and you have to go to someone else, it looks like you're doing a drug deal because it's like you're trying to like hide the thing and it's like no one can see
like
what's
a handshake.
Yeah. And it's like, what is this about? Like,
also, do you realize they make those like silent wrappers too? That like you open them and you don't even hear them open. Like somebody created a silent wrapper, at least in this.
I understand. I remember when I was like still even like a few years back in bathrooms and I would open like a pad, it makes like the little sound, you know? And when you take it off of your panties, it makes a sound too. And I'd be like trying to wait to make sure that no one else is in the, and it's like, seriously, Anne-Claire, like anyone who's in here is a woman and she's probably going through the same, like a similar thing. It should really be a nothing thing. And yet we've been clearly taught that there is something wrong about it.
Yeah, it's interesting how it is that way. I hope that changes. Like I know in our field, one refreshing thing is that when women gain their period back, it is very celebrated. I know there's some folks, it can get really disordered and like some folks wouldn't be happy. But in general, gaining your period back is celebrated, which I do appreciate. In the world, yeah, the period thing is weirdly still a very quiet, shy, shameful experience. But I know we wanted to talk a little bit about our personal experiences. So I want to hone in on you because you mentioned early menstruation. I know that's something you went through, and I know that I had a very different experience. So let's focus on that a little.
Yeah. So I remember the first time we had this discussion, sharing how, so as I said in the previous recording, I was actually a taller, bigger girl in my class, in my age group at the time. Now, I'm far from being the tallest. And my body developed really early. So I was in primary school and I started getting boobs really early, like having to go and buy bras when no one else needed them. Clearly makes you feel like your body's wrong. I remember being teased for being bigger. I actually was one of those humans that experienced bullying, unfortunately, in primary school. Like so much so that we actually had to get like teachers involved and stuff because that's how bad it got. And I got my period when I was 11. And it's just a mix of things because not only are you like the only one facing these issues, so you're even extra shameful. Like, you know, we were talking about shame, extra shameful because you have to deal with this thing and no one else has to deal with this thing except for you. And you have to like manage these things. There's no one that you can really talk about this with. And I feel like because I developed early, I could see the male gaze and that objectification change when I was that young. And I felt so wrong, like walking in the streets and having people look at you like you're a piece of meat and you're 11. You don't have the skills yet that it takes. And I was a pretty confident child. Like I was like feisty and I could like, you know, stand up for myself. But even I would feel like really vulnerable and like something was wrong. And so of course, that contributed to me being like, why on earth does my body have to be wrong again about something? Like, it was already too big. It was already like, now I have my period. Now I have boobs. Now people look at me weirdly. Like, people like, tell you to smile in the street and like, get a bit too close to you and you get comments. And it's just like, yeah. So that's my experience.
Yeah. And I remember you mentioning that you kind of took away the belief that you're too much after that.
Yeah.
Like, your body was too much and you were too much.
Everything. I mean, it's just like, it would be safer, right? To have a less of all of this and to just not be seen as much. Because then I wouldn't have the comments. I wouldn't have like the weird, disgusting gaze, from really old males in the street. Like, ugh.
That's really uncomfortable. I hate that you had to go through that. I had a very opposite experience. No better or worse. I think it still messed me up too. So I was a late bloomer. I was always really tall, kind of bean Polish. So I didn't have to deal with curves or anything, but I was the opposite. So everyone in my grade was like developing, like looking more like women. And I just looked like a straight up kid. Like the curve thing, I mean, totally lacked in that department, probably through high school. Like even after puberty, I was just kind of like, they call it like the boyish shape on all those stupid magazines and stuff. So I developed the concept that I'm not enough. Like that's what I took away from it. It was like, I felt like I was missing something or there's something wrong with me. Like, why couldn't I just be your average like woman? I'm sure I would have had a problem with that too, right? It's like you really, either side of the coin is hard, but I didn't get my period till I was 14. So I was much older. I was still ashamed of that because it's like, I should have had this already, but I also don't want this at all kind of a thing. And I remember this was actually very striking. In my late 20s, I went to a hypnotherapist for relationship struggles. Like I was like trying to figure my shit out. And what came up in this like hour and a half hypnosis session came back to feeling like I wasn't enough. And do you want to know what image came up in my hypnosis session? Freaking Disney princesses. I kid you not. There were Disney princess silhouettes in my hypnosis, like Cinderella's dress, in my high school cafeteria. And the whole message of that hypnosis session was, I never got my body to look like that. I never had a body that naturally looked like that. And it was really like weird because somehow my subconscious linked my relationship issues all the way to what I feel and felt was a totally unrelated thing. So it's just like puberty is such a fragile time and you interpret meaning about yourself just by going through it, whether it's you're too much or not enough. I hear women say those phrases all the time. And I wonder if that's
literally, no one can get it right.
Yeah.
And no one tells us that any version is fine too, right? There is a reason why it's always too much or not enough. It's because someone out there is profiting from us believing that something is either too much or not enough. And I don't want to be too kind about this. Like there are people making a whole lot of money from us being dissatisfied. And I'm not surprised that young Meg went into modeling afterwards. I mean, you found a place where you got validation for the body that seemed to have never been enough up until then. Like, that's so not surprising that then that gave you something that you were seeking and that you were needing if you couldn't find it anywhere else.
Yeah, it was like I was a freak of nature in real life. And then so I was almost 6 feet tall too, which just doesn't help the situation when you're going through puberty. You have that fear. I don't want to be the big tall girl too. Like that's a whole thing that tall girls probably relate to. But it was, I think that world validated at least my height. And I was like, this is so much easier to access validation. If I could just manipulate my body to fit that mold, then
just manipulate my body.
Torture myself. develop an eating disorder, then I could legit feel okay in this body and feel special and feel like I'm good enough because at least I could say I'm a model. Yeah, I appreciate you having that understanding, like looking at the big picture of my path, because I'm sure that's where it all kind of went.
And I can only imagine how you being a twin sort of like exponentially sort of like took that and went like, whew, like, because now you have a carbon copy of you just to reflect the stuff back all the time.
So I want everyone to just close their eyes and imagine how uncomfortable you felt looking at yourself in the mirror when you were going through puberty. Imagine having a carbon copy of you with the same exact DNA who looks exactly identical to you in real life, standing in front of you everywhere you go. So you can see everything you're uncomfortable about with yourself externalized, interacting with you and everyone you care about day to day. Like, so I would look across the room and I would cringe looking at my sister. I didn't want to be associated with her. I didn't want to be around her. Like, we hated being partnered together for like little projects or assignments. We felt like we were each other's consolation prize in middle school, which is so sad. Now we'd be like, yes, we get to work together. Woo! It's like totally different. Being great as an adult. But during that time, like the comparison, not just to each other. So there's that externalization of all of your insecurities just in real life. And then everybody naturally compares you. Like, it's like everyone's game. They're like, oh my God, twins, let's find the differences. And people will come up to you and be like, who's smarter? Who's prettier? And they will say their answers. They'll be like, I think you're prettier. And then you, either feel bad for feeling good about that, or you feel good about that. And you're like, I'm a horrible person. Or they say, you're the uglier twin, actually. Katie's really prettier, or whatever. People would say that. Thankfully,
of course they would. Everyone, like, come on, it's the same society that thinks it's normal to talk about diets and bodies in every single conversation. Of course, they're going to feel comfortable talking about twins' bodies.
Terrible. So, of course, size was a focus for us. So we would constantly be kind of comparing our like measurements and our weights and kind of like disorderly motivated to lose weight based on the other person, because it was this competition trying not to be the quote bigger twin. Really sad. I remember making some really cruel comments to my sister when maybe her body went up literally a few pounds or vice versa.
Yeah, so. But again, as much as I can see how that's you saying something or like this observation fueling it, it's the world around that makes that be something that fuels an eating disorder, right? Because I want to keep in mind the question that we had started with, and it's like, am I responsible for my eating disorder? It's not because, say you're a twin and you entered this, war or competition around the weight stuff. Still not your fault, people. Still not your fault. Like, the world around you has taught you over and over again how that is something that you should care about and you should focus on. So when you do that, still not your responsibility, right? Like, I just want to make it extra clear. These pieces of the puzzle, they give you understanding in terms of like, why did I develop this eating disorder? And you cannot forget about like the environment in which you were evolving.
Yeah.
Current world environment has set certain rules of the game that are thoroughly disordered. So even when we make choices, we make them in that environment. We didn't make them independently from the environment. So still does not change the answer about whether or not you're responsible for developing your eating disorder. Today, you're responsible in terms of like, what am I doing with this information and how can I change one thing today and another thing tomorrow? That's where your responsibility lies, not in the past. So just wanted to add that in there.
Always helpful to have that reminder, because it is really hard. And I could go on and on, like being a twin was just so strange with the comparison thing. And thankfully now I feel like I have an extra shield towards comparison because I was compared so much. But it was tough. And we both ended up developing eating disorders. It wasn't just me. So there are twins out there who have eating disorders. being a twin is a known risk for having an eating disorder. So have some compassion with yourself. You're given a little bit more challenges with the world loving to compare yourself. And I do want to say, just less than a month ago, we were at a huge dinner with maybe 12 or 15 people. And a woman like paused the whole conversation and goes, "Who's smarter? We're in our 30s. Like,
well, not you, lady. Clearly.
I was like, I literally gave her like this glare of death. And I think I shrugged her off. Like, there's no part of me that wants to debate that question or any other question, but it still happens. So anyway, I'm kind of getting fired up. But
again, it shows more something about this lady than you, right?
Oh my
but
God.
this is something that we can do now. But when you're young, like give your young you a break. Like you, but you, anyone watching this, like you did what you could with what you had.
Yeah. Yeah. She's like, "Who had better grades?" I was like, "Didn't we go to school like 15 years ago?" Like, I don't know. Like, why? What? But yeah. So anyway, bottom line of the story is, if you have this feeling you're not enough, or maybe you're too much, perhaps it's linked to the jolt of puberty and just the changes that come upon you during that time. And we just have a lot of compassion for everyone listening today, because it is hard to kind of survive that time period unscathed. Like,
it's so hard. And if you spotted anything that resonated with you, or that just you went like, oh, there's maybe something there in my own story, bring it up with your treatment team, your therapist, your coach. They will let you know who's the most adequate person to continue the discussion with. But give that to yourself, that understanding and the extra layer of compassion that this hopefully brings you.
Yay. Okay, everyone. Well, we hope you have a beautiful rest of your week. We're looking forward to seeing you all very soon. And actually, when this comes out, I want you to head on over to the Recovery Collective website, because doors will be opening January 20th. So if you want to become a member of me and Anne Claire's online community that only opens 3 times a year, get yourself on the waiting list now, because we want to meet you and we want to work with you in a group setting on a regular basis. If you're loving this show, you're going to love the collective even more, because it's us plus amazing recovery warriors who are all supportive of each other. So go check out the show notes or links. Are they show notes? Check out the show notes.
The thing that's below the video.
Clicky, click, click.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, anyone watching. If you want to leave a comment, please do. Don't hesitate to leave questions for future videos. Don't hesitate to share about this on your social media account and tag us. We will reshare. Always appreciate your support. Wishing you a lovely weekend, week, whenever you're watching this. Meg, I love you. See you next time.
I love you too. I'll see you soon.